Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Stench of Truth radio show here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com. I'm here every Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. I'm your host, Ted Torbitt, and this is my show, and we talk about paranormal and parapolitics. And today I have one of the greats in parapolitical research, and that would be Kenn Thomas, who barely needs any kind of discussion or introduction because he is so well known amongst just about everybody. I think even skeptics might be inclined to accept some pronouncements that he would make, more so than a lot of other people in the field. Probably best known for his work on JFK. He just had a recent book come out which redid the Maury Island UFO case with more of an emphasis on the connections with the JFK assassination. And we talked about that previously on a show that we did earlier this year, and I wanted to have Kenn on again today so that we could talk about a few other interesting topics that he has written about over the years and see where these things stand today and what we might be looking at as far as parapolitics happening within America today. His main website is steamshovelpress.com, steamshovelpress.com, and you can also find him on Facebook under Steam Shovel Press as well. There's a page for Steam Shovel Press on Facebook, so you can check that out as well. But he has, keeps his website up to date as far as what he's doing, what kind of books are coming out, and what he's working on. So definitely check it out there. And without any further ado, I'll bring Kenn Thomas on. Hi, Kenn.
Hiya, Ted. It's good to be back.
It's real nice to have you back.
Mm-hmm.
I always enjoy a good discussion about conspiracies, and you are the best person to talk to about that subject because you have written so many books and, reprinted with forewords, older books that have not seen the light of day until you brought them back out and brought them to a wider audience. And you've been in this field for a long time, and I think it's very good that we have sort of mentor figures in the field of parapolitics.
Well, I'm very, very flattered, very honored by that concept. Of course, when I got into it, I had people I was looking up to, like Mae Brussel and John Judge, who's actually still very active.
Indeed, yes.
And I'm always taken aback because there's a part of me that's always just really the consumer of conspiracy material. Mm-hmm. And when somebody like I was in Aztec, New Mexico, not too long ago, and somebody came up to the table and said, "Man, you changed my life. You opened up my mind to so many different things." And I'm like, wow, it doesn't seem that way to me, And for one thing, I've never made any money at it. So you figure fame and money should go hand in hand. Where's the money? But I'm always flattered and honored and happy. There's nothing I'm doing for other people, really. It's primarily for myself, trying to learn about things and push forward what I know and push away all the kind of crap that we get in the media that they want to tell us is real, that isn't, and all the reality that they want to laugh at or ignore that we know is real and far more interesting, far more important to understand.
I believe so, and of course, as you point out, I mean, you tend to stumble across this stuff in the pursuit of information, in the pursuit of trying to understand things. You cannot help but run into conspiracies. You cannot help but run into the stream of parapolitics, which runs alongside of regular politics in this country, if you even want to call it that these days, because even regular politics, quote unquote, is so cartoonish and filled with buffoonery and clownishness that
That's so true.
Oh goodness, it's so terrible.
That's absolutely right. It's almost like there are no politics anymore. There's just the parapolitics and the dumb show. You know?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And of course, the real truth, if anybody's going to find any, is looking outside whatever is presented to us, because all we're presented with now is nothing but a bunch of garbage. So it's good that we have researchers that continue to look into this stuff. And of course, you mentioned John Judge, and he's very involved with COPA still, I believe. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And they, they do the conference every fall. In November, on November 22nd, the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, they have a conference down there that has all the best researchers. And the Kennedy thing is so old now. One of the dangers that they always run is of having nothing but a kind of academic discussion about a historical issue. When really what we come to understand in studying the JFK thing is that it's about, even though it took place 50 years ago, it's about the world we're living in now. It's about conspiracies and assassinations and ways of doing business that are dishonest, underhanded, and go against what we're supposed to stand for. That's a political, or not a political, some kind of a social value that we have in the present. It's not, it's not like you don't go to Dallas to reenact the assassination like the Civil War guys reenact the Civil War,
Oh yes, absolutely, yes, yeah. And of course, it's also important not only to not fall into that idea of just having a dry academic discussion about things, but people need to realize that even though the Kennedy assassination is so old, being around for decades, there are still little bits of information that are coming out that fit little tiny pieces of the puzzle together from time to time. So you can always build upon what has come before. And I think that's sort of the nature of it. There's just so much information to collate and so many connections to make.
That was true, in the early 90s when Oliver Stone did his movie on JFK. That led to this great groundswell of activism that opened up a lot of files that were supposedly going to be sealed, well into, a decade from now, which was more than 2 decades from then. So many files got opened up then, and then we learned a whole lot more about the Kennedy assassination after that. But there are still hundreds of files that the CIA has determined would be a threat to national security if they are released. Files on this crime that is 50 years old. And those files, there's actually a former Washington Post reporter named Morley, I forget his first name, I think it's John Morley, who is suing the government to release these final files. And they all concern the anti-Castro Cubans, where Jim Garrison thought Fred Crisman was among them, right-wing anti-Castrolites in the South. So these files may have stuff on Crisman, and in case your listeners don't understand this, Crisman is the main focus of the JFK and UFO book. He is the witness to the Maury Island case, and he's the guy that Jim Garrison thought was the Grassy Knoll shooter. So it just so happens that the files that they're still sitting on, that that would advance our understanding of this case enormously, are the ones that involve, this case, the book that I've written about.
Indeed. And, of course, you've touched upon the JFK assassination in other works as well. One of the other books that you sort of brought from obscurity was the Torbitt document in NASA, Nazis, and JFK. And this is a book that deals with the sort of nexus of Nazis, NASA, and the space program, along with a lot of other pretty odd and strange things going on at that particular time in history.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Well, the Torbitt document covers a lot of ground, but those points in it were the ones that I was trying to emphasize. I wrote a kind of a long introduction to this. So that was the first published version of the Torbitt document, which was samizdat, the Russian term for underground literature that was kind of passed around Xerox to Xerox, in the days before the internet, to the Kennedy research community. And that was like their first idea of what the behind-the-scenes stuff was. And there is all this material in there about Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger, all these people who were the slave masters at Nordhausen, who helped build their space program. And so I tried to emphasize that, because in the long run, where most of my research leads to is how the Kennedy assassination ultimately flowered into a huge science fiction nightmare, global culture that we are living in, and in order to get back to any sense of normality, that we have to understand and deconstruct. And so for many people, the Torbitt document, that was the first step in that direction, was finding the Torbitt document.
Well, I think that it's very true to say that the Kennedy assassination is kind of a linchpin event for everything that happened in the 20th century after that point, and even into the 21st century, because it represents a coup d'etat in one form or another, and it also conducts a ritual act on the nation as a whole by subjecting everybody to trauma in the form of seeing a beloved president murdered on TV and heard about immediately. First time in history when this kind of thing could be learned relatively quickly. Not instantaneously like what we have today, but the news spread very fastly around the world. It was an earth-shaking event, and to understand the players involved in it also will reveal possibly what these players had to gain and where they have led us since that time.
And also how they did it, which is the big official reason why they sit on top of files like this, is that they don't want to reveal means and methods, which is precisely what we want to know, And so lately, actually, the latest thing, of course, are these Jackie Kennedy tapes, right? You've heard about these?
Yes, I have.
And according to one set of, I don't even want to call them rumors, because they got just as much substance as, what's being reported as, quote, the truth. But supposedly she fingers Lyndon Johnson, as being behind the assassination in these tapes, according to what some people are reporting. Others are saying that that's not true at all, and when the tapes come out, there'll be something entirely different.
Oh, yes.
But, there was just the mere emergence of these tapes was actually the kind of the result of a manipulative struggle that you might describe as conspiratorial. Forget that. I think it was ABC. I think ABC's the network's going to broadcast these things, but they were ready to broadcast some fictional mini-series about the Kennedy family that really made the Kennedy family look bad, and the family didn't want that to happen. So it traded these tapes of Jackie Kennedy that have never surfaced before with ABC, ABC's agreement that they wouldn't present the miniseries. So that's
I've already seen
out there.
I've already seen the ABC several times downplay the stories about what's in the tapes, saying that there's not really anything all that explosive in there, and sort of downplaying the rumors, as you've pointed out. Supposedly Jackie implicating Johnson. She wouldn't have been the only one that was doing that at the time. One of Kennedy's secretaries famously scribbled notes as he learned about the assassination as to who the primary suspects would be, and Johnson was top of his list. So it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility for her to think this.
It's absolutely impossible to exclude Johnson from kind of ancillary role. I mean, there would have been no point in killing JFK if Johnson was just going to further JFK's political agenda, particularly with regard to Vietnam. Johnson reversed that, and that's no coincidence. So they had to know that whoever was going to take JFK's place wasn't going to be another JFK, or else there wouldn't be any point in killing him in the first place, right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
So logically speaking, there has to be at least that much of a connection with Johnson. And Johnson had a long history of corruption, even using assassins. And in fact, when they finally produced a fingerprint from the book depository, it turned out to be a fingerprint of Mac Wallace, who was a guy, an assassin already suspected of having killed one of Lyndon Johnson's sister's boyfriends, that Johnson may have hired him to do that, and also an investigator in the Billy Celestes case. So, I mean, Johnson is all just utterly tainted with corruption in the first place. And then in the second place, logically, as the beneficiary of the assassination, you got to think that maybe there's some involvement there. But whether Jackie Kennedy believed that or not, I don't know. For one thing, she certainly understood about the conspiracy. That's the whole point of her marrying Aristotle Onassis, to give her children the protection of the international mob, because she knew that, they were in danger. But, we all have the advantage of 50 years of study by thousands and thousands of people. And there's no way in the world that, Jackie's going to know as much as we do now. Mm. So she may express some suspicions, but no matter what she says, she's not really an authority.
Well, indeed, no. And especially considering that the recordings were made shortly after the assassination. So the vast majority of information that we have today would not have been available to her. But, you mentioned her marrying Aristotle Onassis as being a way to help protect her and her family with the support of the international mob. And, of course, that brings up another very interesting conspiracy piece of literature, and that would be the Gemstone file, which talks about the fact that Jackie did indeed marry Onassis for that specific purpose, and it talks about some other aspects of the JFK assassination. Also gets into Howard Hughes and some other really bizarre notions, but that's another one.
Yeah, go ahead. Gemstone file was another one of those things like the Torbitt document that circulated hand to hand for the longest time. It was a long timeline of events involving a guy named Bruce Roberts, who felt that his technique he had developed to create artificial gemstones had been shanghaied by Howard Hughes, and it all gets wrapped up into the Kennedy assassination. And that was kind of summarized. Mae Brussler had a large file on this. And a woman named Stephanie Caruana was able to go over this stuff and distill it down into something called the skeleton key to the Gemstone file. And that's the timeline. So, we put that in a book called Inside the Gemstone File. We put that in there, plus another very similar document that was done in Australia called the Kiwi Gemstone, and then assembled all of the then available commentary on it, and put it in that one volume. So even today, I mean, there are 3 or 4 books on the Gemstone file, but I think the one we put together was probably the most complete in terms of how it was received in the research community.
Well, I have that one. I have the one that you put together. As well as the NASA Nazis JFK. There's another book that I was looking at today, Parapolitics, one of the more recent books that you came out with, which is a collection of lectures and articles that you have written or given over a period of time, which touched upon a lot of different topics. I thought that was a pretty good read as well, especially if you're looking for short
little things. That one's actually got a sequel. At steamshovelpress.com, I created. I'm trying to move my work into the POD process online, and so I created a sequel book to Parapolitics called Popular Parapolitics, that's available only as a PDF document through the website. And it's really kind of more of the same stuff. The kind of my adventures in the various subcultures I get to visit because of what I do. You know, UFO conferences and conspiracy conferences, and just talking to people and meeting up with different characters and so forth.
Yeah, I see it on the website. It's just a little bit down from the top. New ebook, Popular Parapolitics, 219 pages of commentary. So that's good then. I guess I'll have to get that. Add it to my giant pile of things to read.
May it grow ever higher.
Yes, indeed.
May you never get to the bottom of it until your dying breath.
That's right.
But like I said, the what I'm trying to do. In fact, I just turned down a contract to write a book about Lyndon Johnson, particularly in response to everything that's going to happen after the Jackie Kennedy thing. I turned it down because, my like I said, I don't make any money off of this stuff, and I'm not trying to be selfish, but the more money I can make off of it, the more resources I have to be able to do more research. And it just seems to me that I get ripped off by my publishers for the most part because they don't pay. The advances are not good enough. The royalties aren't good enough, and you can theoretically make more money just making things available online. So that's my first step in that process. And I'm thinking if I do a book on Johnson, I'll make that kind of more of a print-on-demand thing, not a PDF document like this, but something that you would just order, and it would come to you like a regular book. I'm sure you understand what the POD.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Press is like. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be moving in that direction, or to ebooks. You know, like something you can get on Kindle and things like this, as well.
That's
electronic
right,
books rather than just the print side of things. But if I had my way, books would be here to stay because I love my paper and I love my books to hold in my hand. And
I totally agree.
Yeah, and I like to have a big library. If I could have my whole house filled with books, I would. I mean, I just love them.
Well, I have I do have a house filled with books. Actually, the second floor mostly, but there are several bookshelves down at the bottom. And I work in a library, so I have access to every book out there. Except some of these books are self-published and very hard to get a hold of, and that's basically what I surround myself with. Stuff that I know it's going to be hard, to try to get through interlibrary alone,
Yes.
Keep it on hand here.
Yes, absolutely. And well, I wanted to ask you. You briefly sent me a reply when I sent you that document earlier today to have a look at, which is the first time that I saw it. That referred to Lee Harvey Oswald being used by the CIA in some capacity, and my initial impression on it when I first saw it was this got to have big problems with it because otherwise I would have heard about it before, and I had never heard about the document before, and the fact that it's just confidential and the style of writing, as you pointed out, seems to make it problematical.
Yeah, that was the big thing with me. It just didn't seem like. I mean, I've read lots of top secret documents and stuff that I've gotten through Freedom of Information Act requests, and I know how those bureaucratic minds write, and it doesn't really sound like that. I mean, but that's a really kind of a vague thing to dismiss the document. But I don't think we really need a document to tell us that Oswald was some kind of a spy, and whether you want to call that agency the CIA or DISC or the DIA or the NSA or NRO or any part of the alphabet soup. Oswald, we know, was, again, the short version of his biography, stationed at Atsugi, where the U-2s flew out of, defected to the Soviet Union. Shortly thereafter, they had information they needed to shoot down Gary Powers' U-2. Oswald took a job at Jagger Childs Stovall before he got the book depository job, and that was a photo firm that processed U-2 film. So that's either all, a very interesting coincidence, or it's an indication that Oswald was some kind of an agent connected to the U-2 program. And the U-2, of course, was developed at Area 51. And so, all roads lead back to the UFO nightmare.
Yeah, indeed they do.
Yeah.
And there also seems to be a very strong connection involved with mind control, because when you talk about Oswald being in Russia, I'm immediately reminded of another piece of literature which talked about Oswald's possibly being a mind-controlled person, and I believe the title of that one was Were We Controlled by Lincoln Lawrence.
By Lincoln Lawrence, which was a pseudonym too. That was actually a man named Art Ford. And this was another value-added edition that we came up with. The edition we came up with is called Mind Control Oswald and JFK. And it reprints Were We Controlled, another hard-to-find book, about the idea that Oswald was a victim of some kind of mind control technology. And again, another long introduction to that discusses the history of mind control technology in the 30s with the Russians, and on up through the 60s with Jose Delgado, who was the guy that developed the technology discussed in Were We Controlled, which is called RHIC-EDOM, radio hypnotic intracerebral control of the brain and the electronic dissolution of memory. And it's a very real thing, I mean, you can go, and it's reproduced in the book. It's reproduced in those portions of the book that I put together, not in the original. But it shows Jose Delgado, the Spanish scientist who developed this technology, standing in a bullfight ring. Ernest Hemingway in the back there watching. The bull comes towards him, is racing toward him. He presses a button on something called the stemoceiver, and the bull stops dead. It just stops because he's got an implant. Electronic dissolution of, maybe the bull forgot what he was doing. Radio hypnotic intracerebral control of the brain. Now, it's interesting because I don't really think anybody's ever argued the other mind control technology with Oswald, drugs. I don't think people, except for the fact that we know that from his library card, is it Oswald or Ferry? David Ferry, one or the other, checked out Brave New World, by Huxley, but everybody's reading that book. Anybody has ever said that they gave Oswald a drug to do this. And when you get into the whole thing, it's to do what? Nobody really believes that Oswald shot anybody that day. He was on the second floor of the book depository sipping a Coke. So I speculated that, when you actually look at the technology, Delgado doesn't make the bull get up and charge. He stops the bull. So if they were using that technology, maybe Oswald was being set up to do something, but they stopped him from doing it. I mean, that would kind of fit all of this deconstructive analysis.
Like a last-minute change of plans by whoever was controlling things behind the scenes.
Right, so that if he was under control, it was a thing to stop him from, doing what he potentially could have. Because we know there are, any number of shooters in Dealey Plaza. I'm suggesting one of them was Chrisman, of course.
Yes.
So Oswald could have been set up to maybe shoot if he had to, but he didn't have to because. And you do see, you watch the Zapruder film, and there is the famous radio controller man standing right next to the umbrella man, doing hand signals to the book depository, the Daltex building, and the grassy knoll, coordinating the crossfire shots. It's all pretty clearly seen in the film. So there's radio control going on there. And there's also other photographs of the tramps where the tramps are being escorted very casually by the police in one direction. But walking in the other direction, there's a man with a radio control device behind his ear. And that man has been identified by Fletcher Prouty as Edward Lansdale, who many, many people consider like the guy who was running the whole cell within the Pentagon that led the Kennedy assassination.
He was bad news for sure. There's no question about that. That guy was highly connected.
And I have a very interesting story about him.
Well, tell us, please.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of old television. old obscure television. And I was watching the Richard Boone show. And you're probably too young to even know who Richard Boone is. But his famous show is Have Gun Will Travel. It's a famous cowboy actor. But when that show was over, he did an anthology series called The Richard Boone Show. And I'm watching it one night, and this whole story is unfolding in front of me. And I'm intrigued by it because the bad guy in the story is being played by Woodrow Parfrey, who is the father of Adam Parfrey, who runs Feral House, my publisher. And Adam's an old friend of mine. So I'm watching this, and then Boone comes on, and the whole thing is very clearly another film depicting an Edward Lansdale character, which would bring to 3 the number of filmic treatments about Lansdale. Lansdale is the ugly American. Marlon Brando portrayed him in a movie I think it came out in '63. Michael Caine played Lansdale in a movie called The Quiet American. And here's Richard Boone and Adam's dad doing it again, yet again, another filmic version of basically kind of a right-wing guy who's trying to take a hard line in the Philippines. Basically, that's where Lansdale did his service. But the whole same thing applies. You know, we're just not fighting in Vietnam hard enough. The kind of guy.
And this guy touches into some other areas too. If I'm not mistaken, when I talked to Chris Milligan, who's a publisher of Trine Day, I'm sure you know who he is, Trine Day book publisher. His father was in the CIA, and he claimed to have come across pictures showing his dad with General Lansdale. In several of the pictures. And, of course, his dad was the one that clued him into how the Vietnam War was all about drugs. And, of course, we do have the huge legacy of heroin and the Golden Triangle and Kun Sa and all of the other stories coming out of Vietnam, in addition to the drugs being imported into this country inside the body cavities of dead soldiers. And that leads to... Yeah, and that leads to another conspiracy as well, and that would be the guy's name escapes me. It's a colonel who is in prison for life for supposedly killing his wife or girlfriend.
Oh, Jeffrey McDonald.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, the one who blames it on the hippies, though.
Yes, he does blame it on the hippies, right. Yes, but I do believe that he did at some point in time try to expose that whole drugs via body bags kind of deal. I think he was connected in with that some way, which would have made him a target for somebody who wanted to get him out of the way.
Right, yeah, well, that's absolutely true. You know, Bo Gritz was connected to that whole thing, too. Bo Gritz was hired by Ross Perot to go in and rescue lingering POWs in Southeast Asia. And in the process of that, he had an interview with Kun Sa. And he asked Kun Sa, who is your connection in the American government that allows you to get away with all this stuff? And Kun Sa, he's got it on videotape. Kun Sa says, Richard Armitage. And, you know, it's a name you don't hear much anymore, but Armitage played a huge role in the Bush administration. And, you know, he's a known commodity, a known conspirator. He was also somebody that was studied by Danny Casolaro for the octopus research.
Yes, and that of course brings up another area of interest that you and the late and lamented Jim Keith worked on together, and that's the octopus of Danny Casolaro, which is another one of these sort of nexus of conspiracy ideas that come together through the auspices of several very, at one time or another, prominent figures. And that particular story is filled with a lot of tantalizing information about the military-industrial complex, which I guess is like a sort of stand-in for what Casolaro is referring to as the octopus.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. It's the underlying phenomenon we're dealing with is the MIC, military-industrial complex. But I think I may have pointed out to you before that I believe that the Maury Island story and the JFK UFO story is actually a prequel to the octopus story, primarily through this connection of Michael Riconosciuto, who was Danny Casolaro let me do a quick update for listeners who are not familiar with the octopus. Danny Casolaro was found dead in a West Virginia hotel room days after he told everybody around him that if anything happens to him, be very suspicious of it. That he's dealing with some really nasty characters investigating this thing he called the octopus, which is a huge transnational conspiracy to control and consolidate power. His main informant was a guy named Michael Riconosciuto, who was the son of Marshall Riconosciuto, who was a business partner to Fred Krisman, again, the guy that Garrison thought was the Grassy Knoll shooter. So you see this intergenerational continuity of covert intelligence work, assassinations, political manipulation going on from, generation to generation. So, yeah, it's all connected,
It is, and that's the beauty. I mean, we start off on one topic and we move into, a dozen others because everything is connected. I find that Riconosciuto is a really enigmatic character. Of course, Michael is still in prison, supposedly for running a drug lab. His defense...
That's right, but even if he was running a drug lab, how long has he been in prison now?
Long time. Long time.
So...
Well, he says he was trying to extract heavy metals out of ores using various types of chemicals, and they tried to say he had a meth lab set up and all this kind of stuff. And but he was a boy genius who was recognized.
That's right. He worked with Arthur Schalow, the Nobel laureate in laser physics, when he was like 14 years old.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, and he was also a record producer, as I recall. I have an interview. I had a two-part interview with him. One part's in the Octopus, and the other part's in Maury Island. And he came across Casolaro, of course, when Casolaro was investigating this thing called the Promise software, which is a super sophisticated software, permutations of which they use, for things like Google Earth. But its primary purpose at the time was supposedly not only to track criminals from one prosecutor's office to another, but to feed all the data that you had on, quote, criminals, and you could also do this for political dissidents or for anybody you want. And then it would prognosticate, it would predict what their next move was going to be, and that's how you supposedly stay one step ahead of the bad guys, however you might define them. And Riconosciuto helped develop this software for a company called Inflaw that was, selling it to police agencies around the world, but supposedly selling it with backdoor capacity, so that if Mossad would buy it, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or the ISI, or whoever bought this software, it came with it backdoor access so that our intelligence, U.S. intelligence, Western intelligence, CIA, whatever you want to call it, would know what their intelligence was doing. So we were spying on the client states. And this was all happening actually illegally because it had been expropriated from the Inflaw group that originally developed it, and it was given to one of Ronald Reagan's cronies. And it was the crony who was making the money off of it. But he had gotten it as his reward for approaching the Ayatollah Khomeini and giving him a vast fortune in order for him to hold on to the hostages in the original Iranian hostage crisis until after Jimmy Carter lost the election in 1980, the so-called October surprise. That's what Casolaro was investigating. Yeah.
Yes, and the October surprise, of course, for people who are not familiar with that, it's a little bit back in history. Might have some younger folks on here, not old fossils like us, who maybe don't remember.
It's a long tunnel, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is, and it's amazing.
We could start talking here and then move backwards to the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, indeed, and we could go back to probably 20, 30 years before that for some very important introductory points to what eventually led to that. I'm sure. Right. But the October surprise happened during the election of Ronald Reagan. And there, of course, the Iranians had taken hostage the Americans in the embassy over there when they overthrew the Shah, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came into power. And of course, ever since then, we've had this sort of antagonist relationship with Iran, and that continues to this day. But of course, the hostages were kept, and supposedly Reagan had sent some people over to talk to representatives from the Ayatollah's government, and they made a deal with them that asked the Iranians to keep the hostages until after the election, so that Reagan would be able to beat Jimmy Carter in 1980, because that was a big stain on Carter's presidency, the fact that the hostages were held captive, and he mounted a rescue effort that went down in the desert and was unsuccessful. And, of course, in exchange for that, Reagan agreed to supply them with arms. And that's pretty much the theory around that.
Right. Well, that becomes Iran-Contra. They supply Iran with arms, and the money they make off of that goes to support the Contra cause in Nicaragua, even though Congress had made it illegal for that to happen. But that's an official public scandal, the Iran-Contra thing. The Yinslaw scandal is something that, is perfectly parapolitical. It's percolating in the background while all this other nasty stuff is happening. But the October surprise is as anchored in history as the National Security Memorandum that LBJ signed, reversing the one that Kennedy had signed just weeks earlier, with starting to withdraw advisors from Vietnam. He gets shot. Johnson turns that around. Carter loses, and like on Reagan's inaugural day or something, the hostages are released.
It was exactly the inaugural day when Reagan took office that the hostages were released, and it's certainly
a coincidence. I think not.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think some of the more wild stories that I've heard regarding this are a little bit hard to believe, though not impossible. One claims that George Bush himself, that would be the elder, Reagan's vice president, actually flew to Paris, France in an SR-71 Blackbird that was piloted by, if I'm not mistaken, Gunther Russbacher. Yes. Now, see, that sounds a little far-fetched, but then again, can I say that it didn't happen? No, because stranger things have happened that we have evidence for. So.
The thing is, it's not stranger or less believable than whatever the other story is, the mainstream story, or what somebody else wants to believe, because they weren't there either. They just there's propensity. It's almost a bureaucratic one to think that our elected officials, our CIA, don't do things like that. Only every other country in the world has ascension through assassination, not America, and it's just a naive view. So I would say that, I believe Gunther Russbacher before I believe, a report on CBS or something like
right,
that.
Especially if you were to ask George Bush the elder where he was during this supposed flight, then he would miraculously not have his day planner available, or that page will be miraculously missing, and he will not be able to account for his location, in much the same way when JFK was assassinated. Many people
That's right. There was a George Bush who was debriefed after the Kennedy assassination, and they made this big claim that it wasn't him, it was another George Bush. It's like the second Oswald, there was a second George Bush. But
right. And of course that George Bush denied it. He said he never did such a thing, even though he did work for the CIA, the other George Bush. But they finally tracked him down, and he said, I don't know nothing about that. I never did it. So I think it's pretty clear that George Bush Sr. was involved with the CIA at an early age, and that would explain very neatly why he became CIA director later, and it would also explain why CIA headquarters is named after him.
Well, yeah. Well, when you consider how long, he was vice president all the time, he was the CIA director, then his son becomes president. I mean, much more powerful dynasty than the Kennedy family was, but where you look at that family, whenever they get power, they get shot and killed.
That's right. It's almost like the Kennedys represent like a good force working in American politics that sort of tried to, branch into the political realm in order to try to mollify some of the more detrimental effects of people like Bush and his ilk. And then every time they popped their head up from somewhere, there was someone waiting to take them out. And I think it's very clear that John had some particular ideas about where he wanted to have this country go, and that did not sit well with certain people who had positions of power, and they made sure that he was not able to continue with that endeavor. And the same could be said for Robert as well. Some of his convictions would have been completely against these other people, and of course he was taken out. So
yeah, well, Robert even more so. JFK signed an order to start reducing the advisors that we had in Vietnam, because Vietnam was not that big of a thing yet. Before it became something big, Kennedy was, trying to chill it down, stop it maybe. But RFK was all set to run on an anti-Vietnam platform when he was shot. There's nothing subtle about that.
That's right, and I think well, when you look back, Ken, we've talked before about the secret space program and how a lot of the money being funneled into to our so-called race to the moon may have actually been used covertly for other things. And thus we have today this entire idea of the moon landings being a hoax because they couldn't go, and they built up this whole charade. But in reality, most of the funding being put into that was being put to other nefarious purposes behind the scenes. And I think that's also true when it comes to Vietnam. And I think that a lot of the money being funneled into the Vietnam War was also being misdirected in that regard for, other purposes.
Well, there's always this enormous black budget that has there's no accountability, and you can't track it. And, we do have, like in NASA Nazis and JFK, I've got a photograph of JFK and Wernher von Braun that was published first in von Braun's memoir, and they're together in September of '63, a couple months before the assassination. And according to von Braun, an argument breaks out between the two guys right after the photograph is taken, specifically about what the propulsion system we were going to use to get to the moon. And as a rocket scientist, you have to assume that von Braun was arguing for rockets. Well, what's the argument? What was Kennedy arguing for if it wasn't rockets? And that leads us to the whole moon hoax theory, the possibility that if we did send somebody to the moon, maybe we use something other than standard technology. And you get into the proofs of this, that the lander that I don't know, what do you call the craft that landed on the moon?
Oh,
when it takes off, there's no blast crater.
Right.
Yeah,
and when it lands, there's no dust that has settled back onto the landing pads. They're completely free of any debris. There's no wiped away area underneath of it. It seems to be completely untouched. Etc.
So that that means they either faked it in a back lot in Vegas, or they're using some kind of propulsion system that doesn't have those effects. It doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't go to the moon. There was actually another moon hoax. I discussed this a little bit in JFK and UFO. There was a moon hoax idea that was actually supported by the scientific mainstream in America back in the 50s when the Russians launched Lunik 3, the first craft to go to the far side of the moon and take photographs.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of slow in transmitting those photographs, and its equipment was kind of weak. They didn't get them for a while, and this led many scientists, like the head astronomer at the Smithsonian Institute, to say that this was a hoax, that it didn't happen. This was the first hoax. The Russians were faking it. They didn't take any photographs of the moon. Come on now. So it was actually it was a mainstream idea in the 50s, So we inherit all that as popular culture when these other ideas come forth about it,
Oh, absolutely, and of course, we've had this discussion for a long time now. There are proponents of both sides when it comes to the idea of going to the moon. The alternative technology angle seems to tie in with a lot of this Nazi technology and sort of the survival thing that I talked about recently with Joseph Farrell. And we had mentioned earlier how NASA was completely inundated with so-called ex-Nazis, even though there's really no such thing as an ex-Nazi.
That's like ex-CIA, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't retire. You don't go off to your farm life. If you're in the CIA, you are in the CIA, and you're never out of it. And the same thing goes for Nazis as well. I don't think there's anything as a repentant Nazi. But when we talked about NASA Nazis and JFK just briefly earlier in the Torbitt document, what do you think is the state of affairs now with the remnants of the Nazis, the nascent Nazi movement that apparently went underground after World War II? Did we see a complete infiltration of our nation by these people? Do they control key aspects of our industry? Are they still big players on the international scene? What's your take on
well, the actual Nazis are probably mostly dead at this point.
Well, the original people, yes. Right.
Yeah, but if you put it in context, remember Prescott Bush was censured by Congress because of his business connections to the Nazis. Joseph Kennedy lost his job as ambassador to Britain because he said that he thought democracy was dead, basically because he was sympathetic to the Nazis. So the whole Nazi ideology, the whole Nazi fascist cause, is not necessarily just imported from Germany. It was already there, and it's still here now. I mean, the Bush family is still a very, very powerful thing. So fascism and Nazism is, it may not be called that, but there are, certainly people who kind of believe that, and I mean. But supposedly we don't really have much of a space program anymore. It's supposedly migrating into private hands, which actually gives it, I think, more of an opportunity for wealthy entrepreneurs with fascistic roots to be able to exploit, weaponize, and militarize space. So yeah, I think it's still a very big problem.
Do you think that the fact that the United States has moved away from manned missions, do you think that this is sort of in line with their basic modus operandi when it comes to handling technology and technological development? As soon as they come up with something that's really great, they hand it off to a private company. So now the government can say, I don't know nothing about that, because it's being run by some contractor on the outside that's not subject to any kind of oversight by people and not subject to FOIA requests and things of this regard.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. When you hear these people that talk about they want to reduce the size of government, and whether Rick Perry was saying that his whole platform is going to try to make government as inconsequential as possible in people's lives. Well, what's the alternative? If you don't have government, you've got corporatism, which is kind of a transnational government. It's the same thing. You don't want that to be big and powerful and oppressive, but that never kind of comes up in the discussion.
No, it doesn't.
Kind of I identified. Well, if you're going to call it government, then it's not. Then it's stopping our freedoms. but it's the corporations, who aren't people, but who have more rights than people, that that are causing, some of the worst things that happen in our world.
Mm. I harp about this all the time on my videos on YouTube. I talk about that very issue and how corporations.
Oh yeah, you're great, man. I love it. I love it when you can really whip up the anger. I mean, most people have got to get in touch with that.
It's true, and you know what? It's real. It's how I actually feel. It really does make me mad. It makes me angry when I think about it, and I think about the kind of things that have happened in this country, and a lot of them have their roots with corporations, with corporate involvement, and with corporation money funding it. And a lot of the conspiracies that we're talking about had middlemen that were in corporate fields. They were in charge of various companies and corporations, and a lot of these people moved in and out of this shadowy world, and they're the problem. That's where the real problem is.
Yeah, well, it should be, instead of calling it the military, I guess corporatism follows under the industrial aspect of the military-industrial complex. But bringing it back to Crisman. Garrison felt that Crisman was not working for the Nazis or any political cause. He was working for Boeing, private aerospace industry. And the idea was that Kennedy had taken the TFX contract that was supposed to go to Boeing, and he gave it to General Dynamics. And you can read more about that in the Seymour Hersh book called The Dark Side of Camelot. But that supposedly explains that particular aspect of the Kennedy assassination. That was Crisman's involvement, and it doesn't contradict the idea that people in the Pentagon and corporate bosses who had a stake in making sure that the Vietnam War continued on, like Bell Helicopter, munitions manufacturers, the standard thing, the reason why we live on this big, beautiful blue planet, but we're in a constant state of warfare, totally wasting our resources.
Yes, which we have been now.
Treasure. Why that contradiction always exists is because corporate wealth and corporate greed. And they make money making those helicopters and that ammunition and building those missile systems. And when they lose a contract, like Boeing did to General Dynamics, they are pissed off. So they're ready to cooperate with whatever plan Ed Lansdale and his buddies in the Pentagon, backed by all the oil guys that are behind Johnson, we'll send our guy, Crisman, to actually pull the trigger if you want. And,
I'm sure.
Yeah, and so there you have it, And that brings us back to the UFO nightmare, because that contract was for the TFX fighter, the Technical Fighter Experimental, which later became the F-111, which is a really big deal. They sold eventually to Australia, and that was when they started to develop the funding corridor, the structure that eventually led to the creation of Pine Gap, which is Australia's Area 51. So that the world is now peopled by, or the little spots of these Area 51, Pine Gap type military installations that involve high tech weaponry, possibly connected to stuff that we back engineered from whatever those flying craft are all over the place, still all over the place, that people don't really understand.
Yeah, it's a very big issue. And, of course, Pine Gap in Australia is probably even more secretive than Area 51 nowadays, because there's very little information that's available publicly about what goes on there. But it's quite clear that it's part of the global echelon network, I'm sure, and a lot of other things come out of there. But we're going to take a break right now for some station business, and then we'll come back for the second hour of the show with Kenn Thomas. You're listening to the Stench of Truth radio show here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com every Friday, 7 to 9 p.m. So stick around and join us in a few more minutes for another hour of talk.
Hey
guys, Jamie Havoc in here, reminding you to tune into Future Theater Radio, Saturdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, as hosts Bill and Nancy Burns bring you the brightest and best guests from around the world to share their vast knowledge with us listeners. That's Future Theater Radio, Saturdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, right here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com. Just go there and hit the Listen Live and Chat tab, and you're in business. I'll see you there.
Hi, can you hear my voice? Imagine how many other people can hear it too. If you have advertising needs, then look no further. The Inception Radio Network currently has openings for on-air advertisements and radio show sponsorships. Given any thought to your target demographic? Inception has you covered there too. Advertising on a network gives you multiple opportunities to advertise on a wide variety of radio show broadcasts, and we have one to fit every advertising need. You know, in recent years, internet radio has exhibited a phenomenal listener growth. An Arbitron Edison survey shows that online radio boosts at least 33 million unique visitors each week and 54 million each month. And that number amazingly continues to grow. And these listeners are a part of many businesses' core demographics. And surveys have shown that internet radio listeners are far more likely than regular radio listeners to spend money on a whole range of activities. You know, internet listeners vote, they dine out and eat fast food, and they grab a cup of coffee. And here's the interesting one. They buy items online at a much higher rate than all other market segments combined. Internet radio also enables businesses to connect with consumers during work hours, where increasingly more lifestyle decisions are being made. Advertise with the best. The Inception Radio Network offers competitive advertising rates to fit just about anyone's advertising budget. Stop by today at www.inceptionradionetwork.com or call us toll-free at 1-888-919-2355. Get the word out. Get results with the Inception Radio Network.
Hey guys, Jamie Havoc in here to tell you about Haunted Cornwall FM, which is the UK's first and only paranormal radio show. The show covers a wide range of subjects to do with the paranormal and is always open for discussion and debate and is hosted by John. The show can be heard right here on Inception Radio Network, Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for a 2-hour show. Be sure to check it out. That's the Haunted Cornwall FM radio show, Sundays, 3 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you there.
Hello, folks. Grace Hobbs here for the Inception Radio Network, reminding you to catch the Paranormal Guys radio show. If you like everything in the paranormal, you're going to love Pang Radio. Broadcasting live from the shores of Lake Superior in northern Wisconsin, MJ brings the brightest minds and the best investigators to the show for in-depth interviews, all the while taking questions from the interactive chat, as well as toll-free call-in questions. It's live. It's every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific, and it's Pang Radio with MJ right here on the Inception Radio Network. Hi, this is Ray Hobbs with Arkansas MUFON at Eyewitness Radio, and you're listening to the one and only paranormal mothership, the Inception Radio Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stench of Truth radio show here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com every Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. My guest today is Kenn Thomas, world-renowned parapolitical researcher and well-known in the field of ufology, conspiratoriology, and many other topics related thereto. Now, prior to the break, we were talking about some of the beneficiaries in the death of John F. Kennedy, and we had talked about the military-industrial complex, and one particular group that Ken mentioned was Bell Helicopter, and of course Bell has some other connections with the JFK assassination as well, in that there's a connection between the Paynes and Bell Helicopter, and of course Ruth Payne was well known to be the person that I believe she got him his job at the school book depository. Is that not correct, Ken?
Well, she was Oswald's landlord,
and the landlord, yes.
And she got him the job at the book depository, right?
Yes, which is rather interesting, and so there is this connection.
There's another thing about Oswald, and I really wanted to plug the right book for people to go read more about Oswald as a spy. But there's another thing about his job history that is weird. He had a job, I guess it must have been before Jagger Charles Stovall, because that was the one he had before the book deposit. Before that was with the O'Reilly Coffee Company. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
And then a whole bunch of people lost their jobs or quit or were fired at the same time. And Oswald moves on eventually to get to the book depository, but everybody else that left the O'Reilly Coffee Company went to work for NASA.
Yeah. Now, how does that square? That would be like a local office or a local Starbucks shop closing down and everybody going to work for NASA. How do you equate that with any kind of reality?
Well, the real question is, why didn't Oswald go to work for NASA? Was he supposed to go to, and then was assigned over instead to Jagger Charles Stovall to do whatever he was supposed to do there, which was, also, another thing about that is that there was this Minox camera found amongst his things, the spy camera, not one that was readily available. And also the book that I mentioned before that I should plug here, because the person who's done the most work on this, Oswald as a spy, was the late Philip Melanson, and he wrote a book called Spy Saga. So if people want to follow up on what we're saying here about Oswald as a spook, I suggest that you go there. It's been out for years. Melanson's been dead for a couple of years actually, but nobody has really done more on this topic than that.
That's one book that I haven't read, but I am familiar with Philip Melanson and his work.
His other great topic was the RFK assassination, I believe.
Yeah, and that's probably where I know him from more. Of course, the latest book that you have done is a reworking of the Maury Island UFO affair, which involves Fred Chrisman and Harold Dahl, and their sighting of UFOs over Maury Island, which is in Washington State, and in the reworking, you have kind of taken a greater turn with trying to put more emphasis on the connections that are apparent and relevant between Fred Chrisman and some of the other people who were involved with Chrisman in and around that time, and the Kennedy assassination. And of course, that marries the idea of the Kennedy assassination with the UFO topic. And of course, that's something that's very important for people to realize, that even in this particular field, UFOs still make an appearance.
Right. Well, the thing is that the research drifts into that area. It's not like, I do have a special interest in UFOs. Like anybody, I've been reading UFO books since I was a kid, and I've had my own experiences and all that other stuff. But it's not like I'm trying to do this. It's not like I'm trying to connect, looking for all these connections so that we could talk about JFK and UFO in one breath. It just so happens to be that way. In fact, since the book was published, more stuff has been coming out that that pushes it in that direction. Recently I wrote a blog entry for Skylar Alfagren. Do you know Skylar?
I don't know her personally, no, but I'm familiar with her work.
Okay, she's a brilliant Fortean researcher, and she does a site called Lo-Fi, and I'm not sure what its website address is, but people need to go look this up, because I wrote a blog for her recently having to deal with this plane crash that's part of the Maury Island case, the crash of Davidson and Brown's plane, 2 Air Force investigators who were sent out to talk to Crisman and Dahl about Maury Island, and supposedly they loaded up some of the slag from the Maury Island UFO onto their B-25, and they were flying back to Wright Pat to get it tested when their plane crashed, and they were killed. And despite that, there was some counterintelligence people that were sent out. They never recovered the UFO flag, but there was never a serious investigation of the crash. There was possibility that Crisman had sabotaged the plane, but we don't know that because they never investigated Crisman. Crisman kind of disappears after that. And there's this whole thing about this plane crash that happened in Kelso, Washington. Well, it turns out, and I didn't know this when I wrote the book, the plane is still there. It hasn't been excavated. And part of the reason for that, and this editorial I wrote for Skylar was, let's excavate Kelso. Let's take a look at that plane. And part of the reason why it's never been done is because it's just a crazy UFO case. In fact, half the UFO investigators out here think the Maury Island thing is a hoax. Well, if you told these people that this is about the JFK assassination, we've exhumed Oswald's body. We've obsessed over Kennedy for 50 years, turning over every rock. If people understood that there might be a connection between Kelso and Kennedy, that plane would be excavated, and we could learn whatever secrets it might yield, which may be nothing, but it wouldn't be anything to excavate it either.
Indeed, you're right.
So,
I think they did a TV show where they went out there and they found that there was still wreckage there under where it crashed.
But it's on private property. It's
yes.
on private property, and a full excavation has yet to be done. Now, the other thing that happened since the book came out is the more information that I found out about the connections between the counterintelligence world, or the intelligence world, the parapolitical agencies, I guess, and the entertainment industry. And this all has to do with Fred Crisman's claim that the television show The Invaders was about him. Did we talk about that last time?
You did mention it, I believe, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you remember The Invaders. And for
Yes.
listeners who didn't catch the last one, The Invaders was Roy Thinnes starred as architect David Vincent, who knew about this secret alien invasion, but he could never convince the government about it. From Crisman's point of view, he knows about the Maury Island thing. He knows there's some connection to aliens, and so he's watching the show, and he's saying this is about me. Well, an absurd claim in many ways, but if you track it, the provenance here, The Invaders was done by Quinn Martin, who was a writer originally for The Untouchables, and then he developed his own production studio called Quinn Martin Productions, and they did another program called The FBI. And one of the things we discovered when the true identity of Deep Throat emerged, Deep Throat of the Watergate era, Woodward and Bernstein, that guy's name was Mark Felt. And once that came out, it was discovered that Mark Felt was actually a consulting writer to the FBI for the Quinn Martin Productions. Okay? Now, that's a loose connection, so what? Invaders was by Quinn Martin Production, FBI was. It basically shows that that spooks like Mark Felt can hire themselves out as consultants to TV shows. But then, what I just learned, studying a little more closely, Mark Felt's obituary, is that in the 1940s, the late 40s, he was working for the FBI. His job was to review employment applications for the Hanford nuclear plant up in Seattle. Well, guess who applied for employment there? I have a copy of it. Fred Crisman. So Mark Felt knew Fred Krisman or knew of him or had some contact with him. So it's not just he was with Quinn Martin Productions. He had a connection to Krisman too. So maybe Krisman's claim that his life was being broadcast on television every week wasn't so far-fetched.
Indeed, and of course that's a fantastic example of synchronicity or coincidence that cannot be ignored whenever you do this research. And I think Andy Colvin is another guy that's really connected in with the synchronicity angle of this. And in fact, I'm going to relate a couple of stories to you, which are rather interesting. First of all, the B-25 that crashed out there in Kelso there's a connection with Pittsburgh with our mysterious B-25 crash that we had here in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but that happened in 1956. A B-25 bomber crashed into a river outside of Pittsburgh, and it was never recovered. And there are all kinds of rumors about it being secretly shipped out of the water because it contains some kind of secret cargo. But supposedly the plane just completely disappeared. 1956.
56. Okay.
Yeah, and it was coming from it was on a flight from Nellis Air Force Base to Olmsted in Harrisburg, and it crashed in the Mon, and 6 of the crew of 6 survived the crash, but 2 were later claimed by the icy waters of the Mon. And then over the next 2 weeks, there were all kinds of stories about troops descending on the area and securing the river and the various types of recovery being done. But this is another one of these things where there's no official story, there's no official file. It's almost as though, the plane crashed in the river. It's done. We don't even need to look into that. Take our guys back home. Done. End of story. But it sounds very much like what happened up there in Kelso. So.
Okay. Let me just ask you a question. Are you familiar with the Shaver mystery?
Yes.
Yeah. Richard Shaver was from. Trento? Was it Trento, Pennsylvania? And I've never checked this on the map. Is that anywhere near Pittsburgh?
Trento, did you say?
Yes. I think it's Trento.
I'm not sure. I could look it up.
Well, it's an area worth researching because you realize that Krisman was a Shaver mystery letter writer, right?
Oh, yes.
That he supposedly encountered the Deros in caverns in Burma when he was fighting the war, and they shot him in the arm with a laser-like instrument before, of course, lasers were even created. And, in fact, Ray Palmer published that letter long before he ever hired Kenneth Arnold to investigate Maury Island. So Palmer knew Krisman, but he never mentioned that to Kenneth Arnold. And I've also got reason to believe that Garrison knew who Krisman was before he got all this leaked information. And there's this really strange anomaly in the research that Krisman's presence gets telegraphed in advance in a couple of cases that don't make a lot of sense. But, I don't know where any of that, you got a B-25 here and there, and Richard Shaver and Krisman being part of Richard Shaver might be a fruitful avenue to walk down one of these days.
Oh, I think so. But it just brought that to mind to me, and I pulled up the page that was talking about the crash here in Pittsburgh and how they're both B-25s, and they both were sort of just brushed off as not being important enough to really investigate why they happened and what was going on with them. It says that Shaver was born in Berwick, but he was working at a factory at the time that he supposedly, had his experiences with the Deros and the underworld. But I can't find a place that talks about where exactly that was. But Berwick is not that far from Pittsburgh. Yes, so I'm sure.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So you guys are kind of like Data Row Central there.
Yeah, indeed. And what's interesting, another interesting little connection, since you brought up the idea of Mark Felt, who may have been Deep Throat, although I have questions about that myself, who actually handled employment applications for Hanford nuclear plant up in Washington, and how Chrisman had applied for a job there, and there's a connection between them two. Now, just recently, Andy Colvin came to Pittsburgh, and me and him did a little bit of investigating around this area. And one of the places that we went to was Iron Mountain. And Iron Mountain is it's an underground storage facility near Boyers, PA, which is probably about an hour away from Pittsburgh or so, hour and a half, something like that. Just north and east of, I think it's north and east or straight north of Pittsburgh. Anyway, one thing that we found out after we did a little bit of investigating, it seems that that's run by the Office of Personnel Management. Now, the Office of Personnel Management is probably the least, it's probably the most innocuous government agency, I would imagine, because whoever talks about it in relation to anything. I mean, you hear about FEMA and all these other things, but here's an interesting thing that I did not know, and that is that apparently OPM had their own investigative force that they used to conduct security background checks on everybody who got a security clearance in this country for any kind of work that had any connection to the government. And one of the things that they store in Iron Mountain are all of those records of security background checks for people. And yes, indeed. And it was only about, I think it was in 1996 that the official investigative arm of OPM was outsourced to a private company, which is called USIS. And apparently they continue this work today. So there may be a connection between Iron Mountain here in Pennsylvania and Chrisman and everything that was going on out in Washington, because that's where those records would be come in.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: Is this Iron Mountain connected to the report from Iron Mountain?
I don't know if there's a direct connection, but let me ask you this as sort of an answer, Ken. We know what Iron Mountain, the report of Iron Mountain, is. Okay, how likely do you think that a secret underground storage base for the United States government would just randomly choose Iron Mountain as their name? In relation to what they do, and not have a connection with the report from Iron Mountain. And
of course you realize the cover story about the report from Iron Mountain is that it's satire, and in fact, supposedly when it first emerged, the Pentagon was, at least on the surface, was so concerned that maybe it did originated with somebody within it, that they passed down a memo. They did this big investigation to see if it had somehow been part of their apparatus, and of course they declared that it wasn't, and that in fact it was written by John Kenneth Galbraith or Larry Lettvin or something like that. That's the cover story.
That is the cover story, and I believe the report from Iron Mountain is in fact an official government document, and that even though it is written in a style that one could interpret as satire, one could easily interpret that document as being a straightforward guide for how things are to be handled. And if you look at it in that perspective, I came to the conclusion, and this is just based on a hunch, I don't have any hard evidence for this yet, but I am starting to do some digging into this, that in fact the report from Iron Mountain is indeed connected with the Iron Mountain facility here in Pennsylvania. And I believe that they named it Iron Mountain for the specific purpose of saying, we're Iron Mountain, we're here, and you can't do nothing about it. It's sort of an in-your-face kind of thing, saying, Iron Mountain.
Great. I hope you continue on that research. I mean, that's the idea that it sounds satirical means nothing. I mean, the whole absurdity of this entire situation is sounds satirical. I mean, doesn't it remind you of Robert Anton Wilson And the Illuminatus, you know, you read his books and you don't know, are you reading satire or are you just reading straight history? Because there's not a lot of difference.
Indeed, yes, you're absolutely right. And he paints historical things that actually happen in that kind of light, and they fit in with the satire, but they're actual real events that occurred. So yeah, I'm doing some research in that, and I think Andy will be doing that as well. So I'll keep you informed of what I uncover.
Cool,
definitely.
That's great. You and Andy do fantastic stuff, by the way. I don't really get a chance to comment much. But you know, I'm following you. I think it's great.
Yeah, well, Andy, I'll tell you what. My dream is to one day meet everybody that I talk to on this show, because I've really had a tremendous boost in my learning and in my ability to try to comprehend exactly what's going on with this crazy world by talking to people like you, and by talking to the people that I have as guests on this show. And meeting Andy was a very pleasant experience for me, because he's just a really great guy, and
the most profound and meaningful experience of my life has been when I've been able to get together with like-minded people at various conferences. That's what needs to happen in Pittsburgh or anywhere. Somebody needs to organize a parapolitical conference. There aren't that many of them. There are actually lots of UFO conferences and that kind of thing. But there is one. Brian Hall does his conspiracy conference out in San Francisco.
Yes.
But that's gotten to be just the same handful of people over and over again. But
right.
Somebody needs to take the bull by the horn and actually organize the community. There are still people out there doing interesting research. That needs to be promoted. They need to be connected to each other. They need to form a support system. And, we need to move things forward.
Yes, I believe so. And of course...
So anybody listening out there who has the resources to be able to do that, get your butt in gear and get in contact here with Ted or me or Andy or anybody. And let's organize.
I'll second that. And but in the meantime, we'll keep in touch with each other on our respective researches, and hopefully widen the net a little bit further to get a better understanding of what it is that's going on.
That's great.
So let's just move right on into the UFO subject now, since we did that little backtrack there. I just thought that would be an interesting little connection point for you. That's why I brought it up. When you went digging and you started to look into this, and now this is sort of like a back trail from Chrisman to the Kennedy assassination, all the way back to Maury Island, and we see that we have this UFO connection. But there are other players in this field as well, and one of the most notorious is Guy Bannister, and and he was actually the special agent in charge in the Northwest at the time of Maury Island, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Right. Not the state of Washington, though. It was either Idaho or Montana. It's up in the Northwest. He was the special agent in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, he was handed over a 30-inch flying saucer, and it made all of the newspapers. And they just turned it into this guy, the special agent in charge up there. And then some military people came out and took a look at it, and then the story that came out after that was that it was put together by some kids out of old phonograph pieces.
Yeah, I remember that story.
And there are two very significant things about this currently. The first one is that recently some Roswell researchers have been reinterpreting a rather well-known note that J. Edgar Hoover wrote, in which he talks about the possibility of cooperating with the Army about UFO stuff. He's kind of skeptical of it because he says they wouldn't turn something over to him in what has been read as the L.A. case. Right? You're familiar with this?
Yes, the memo, which
LA
has
case.
the sort of scribbled notation there.
Right, that says the L.A. case. Well, some Roswell researchers are really kind of looking at it really closely to the point where they think the L.A. is actually an SW, which stands for Southwest, and so that he must be referring to Roswell.
Right.
That's a real stretch, right? And it's probably not the case because, the Army handing something over to Hoover from Roswell, but a huge spaceship, they're going to hand it over to him, or a debris field, which is what the real reports are, going to hand it over to him. But surely they could hand over a 30-inch flying saucer that was just recovered by an FBI guy, SAC, working for Hoover. When that happened, only like 2 days before that memo by Hoover was written. So there's everything to suggest that what Hoover's referring to there is actually, Guy Bannister. And Guy Bannister, in case the listeners have lost the trail here, Guy Bannister was who Oswald was working for down in New Orleans for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. That's the JFK link. Here's a guy involved in all the flying saucer activity in the Pacific Northwest in 1947, just like Crisman, showing up at the Kennedy assassination too. And that brings up the second point about Bannister, is that Jim Garrison was working for the FBI in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, let's go through the list now. Mark Felt, Jim Garrison, Guy Bannister, they're all clustered up here in the Pacific Northwest. And Garrison says in his autobiography on the Trail of the Assassins, he says that he used to have lunch with Guy Bannister at that time. If you have lunch and you're talking about stuff, flying saucers surely must have come up after Bannister was, right in the center of a news-reported event involving the saucer. If that came up, surely the Maury Island thing came up. Surely Garrison knew who Crisman was. 20 years before, supposedly he got this letter that connected Crisman up to the Kennedy assassination. So that's that other point I was making before about just Palmer and Garrison both knew who Crisman was way in advance before they ever did anything with him.
Yeah, and I think that one other thing that you mentioned the idea that a lot of people sort of dismiss Maury Island as a hoax, and they do so basically on the fact that Harold Dahl had recanted at some point in time, but
the main witness said it was a hoax.
Right, he had every reason to say that because he had actually been threatened by one of those nefarious men in black. And another little synchronicity for you, Ken. I went out and did some exploring the other day, and I wanted to check out this particular monument in a local local cemetery here. It's a giant pyramid, and it's always intrigued me. And I was like, I'm going to go up there and check it out. And it's real big. It's about maybe 7 foot tall, and the base is probably about maybe 6 feet across on all four sides. And I went up and took a look at it, and it's sort of like a beacon for the grave of Charles Taze Russell, the founder of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, better known as the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Is that right?
Indeed. But here's the synchronicity for you. Now, I knew he was from Pittsburgh, but I had no idea he was buried like 2 miles from my house. But here's the synchronicity. When I was up there filming, probably about 10 feet away from the pyramid was a grave of someone named Dahl, D-A-H-L. The same as Harold Dahl, who was the guy that owned the boat, even though he said that he worked for Fred Crisman, which is kind of one of those weird things, yeah.
Another really weird coincidence. It's like the coincidence also that there are official police records of the Grassy Knoll tramps that were arrested, right? One of them's names is Harold Doyle, which if you say that with a Texas accent, Harold Dahl.
yeah, absolutely. It seems
well, that's
that what we have here is we have a huge nexus of activity happening up in the Northwest. And then it seems to, as times change, it then moves, and the whole thing becomes enmeshed, sort of in the southeast, because we have a lot of these people showing up in Louisiana, and then in Texas with the assassination and things of this nature. So It seems as though, yeah, it seems as though they maybe have all these people involved in some aspect of what they're doing in some particular area in order to further a purpose, and then it's time to move on to another one.
Yeah. I mean, there's a remarkable consistency to that pattern, and if more people understood it and studied it, more people would know the true history of this country better. And it's kind of like. I'm always amazed that people don't know this any better than they do. Few people. There was never before my book came out. There was not a single book written about the connection between. There's not a single book written about Maury Island at all, let alone one about its connection to the Kennedy assassination. And part of that is because of the successful mission of the man in black who visited Harold Dahl. Because even UFO enthusiasts and investigators and all this other stuff, if the main witness is calling it a hoax, well, what are you going to do? Okay, well, let's give up on that one. Obviously, it's a hoax. If you don't remember what any UFO investigator knows about the Men in Black, and that actually also gives me an opportunity to prolong Jim Keith's afterlife a little bit more, to say that anybody who wants to understand about the Men in Black should read the book that Keith assembled and wrote on this, called The Case Book on the Men in Black, which is a current book now. David Childers just reprinted it, and I wrote a whole new introduction to it. So if people want to know more about the Men in Black, look that up on Amazon, The Case Book on the Men in Black.
Yeah, I recommend anything by Jim Keith, and you had the opportunity to actually work with him on a couple of different things, and he's sorely missed because he was an incredible researcher, and he put out a large volume of material before his untimely death. And
good old big Jim Keith, man. I miss him to this day. Of course, his voice still echoes in my head. He was. In addition to being a great researcher, he was just a charming guy, a funny guy. He always, told me that he wanted to be a hip Bill Cooper. One thing about Bill Cooper, whatever he said was true, but he was, in his delivery, a bit of a creepy guy. But right, Jim wasn't. Jim was charismatic and charming and lighthearted, and he could deal with this really heavy stuff and yet retreat back to a comfortable position of kind of laughing at and looking out over it. And that's a rare thing. We don't have guys like that.
Indeed. So as soon as you buy all of Kenn Thomas's books and read them, then go get all of Jim Keith's books and read them, and you'll find that a couple of them are co-written by both of them. So you'll get a little extra.
Well, the big one, the Octopus, and I should mention to you that the Octopus, they've actually optioned the Octopus now 3 times for a possible movie. The first 2 times I was paid, but the movie never happened. When you sell the movie option, it only goes for like 6 months or so. And if they can't get it done or at least started, then they lose the option. Well, it's currently under a 3rd option, and supposedly now there's some major actor seriously considering making it into a movie. So there may, Jim and I may yet have our names on a major motion picture.
Oh, wow, that would be great. Well, best of luck on that. I hope that happens. Well, that's a really fascinating story. So if that were to be made into a movie that was even close to being, factually accurate, it would be pretty outstanding. So, well, Ken, do you have a variegated view on the UFO phenomenon as a whole? Do you think that what we're dealing with here is something that's a combination of a lot of different things? Do you think it's like one basic thing behind all of the screens and all of the stories and all of the interactions and things like this, or what?
Yeah, I kind of feel that way. Although I have to say that there are guys like Nick Redfern just did a book where he was talking about a kind of a clique of military people who actually sincerely believe that all the UFOs are demons from hell. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of a strain in a lot of the people who are thinkers about this that want to dismiss what they call the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And, apparently that's kind of a crude thing to believe these days. And when I say, okay, well, if it's not that, what is it, And they will come up with an idea that maybe these are extra-dimensional things, or maybe they're demons from hell, or, maybe they're this or that. None of which has any more of a claim to possibility than the ETH. So I don't abandon it. I think, this may actually be extraterrestrial beings coming to this planet in flying saucer spacecraft. I think there's plenty of reason to believe that, but I also believe there's plenty of reason to believe that the military takes advantage of that mystery to create situations, and also to cover up things. I mean, of all the things that are going on in Area 51, if nobody ever heard of UFOs or flying saucers, what would we be talking about? We'd be talking about black budgets with no accountability. We'd be talking about the actual things they really do. So whether or not there are extraterrestrials, they're going to use the idea of extraterrestrials to inject into certain public situations to draw the laughter curtain around it and to ridicule it, so that no coordinated understanding ever develops about it. So.
Well, I agree with you that, yeah, it does. It answers the question very nicely. That
But also, let me say this before you go on. I don't mean to interrupt, but I was watching this new show that was on last night on the History Channel about UFOs that had the whole thing about Fife Symington, which I didn't, until I watched this, I didn't really understand. Fife Symington was the governor of Arizona during the time of the Phoenix Lights, the famous Phoenix Lights. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it actually dawned on me when they showed again. The Phoenix craft was several football lengths long. It was kind of a wing that had lights under it, and it passed very, very large, and it passed very slowly across the sky for like 106 minutes. And that happened at like 8 o'clock at night. And then at 10 o'clock, they shot off a bunch of magnesium flares and had all the news crews take video of that. And so the cover story was enacted that what people were actually seeing were these flares, but that had happened, clearly happened hours later. And I didn't realize it, but Fife Symington, who at the time did a press conference where he had a guy dressed up like an alien come out and, said ridiculed the whole idea that the Phoenix Lights meant anything. It now basically says that he saw the craft. He went through the whole story. He saw the friggin' craft. Well, at the same time, he's admitting that they putting out this goofy cover story to ridicule it, and also the idea that they shot off those magnesium flares is proof that they have some connection to it because they're trying to cover it up that way. The same thing happened to me actually when I was. I saw a flying saucer once at Area 51. I also saw a bunch of flares. It didn't occur to me then, though, that maybe they do this every time. They shoot up the flares so that, when you say you saw something and people say, oh, it's a flare.
Right.
So, So,
I'm familiar with Fife Symington, and I'm very familiar with the press conference that he gave with a guy dressed up as a goofy alien outfit. Just to,
but now he says he was standing in a football field and he saw the craft.
Yes. Yes, okay. He does. He changed his story, and he's now saying that was actually something was there, and that basically he was running cover for it and trying to downplay it as nothing but flares in the sky.
Right. But here's another anomaly about the whole thing. So, 106 minutes over a highly populated city, not a single snapshot. No film. I mean, I know it was like right before everybody had the little cell phone cameras, but 106 minutes. Don't you get over? Can't you get over the shock of somebody somewhere? Get over the shock of that enough to, after say 20 minutes, they grab a camera and see it. What is that all about? Why didn't that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure
there
there's
stories about people going out confiscating film like they did at the Kennedy assassination.
That's right. And,
I remember once I went to, I was in D.C., and I went to this hotel that was right across from the Pentagon, and to talk to everybody there about, well, did you see the plane? Because a lot of people believe there was no plane. And everybody in the hotel said, yeah, we saw the plane. In fact, these cameras, and they pointed to the security cameras on every floor of the thing, took video of it. The only video that we have of the plane crash is a series of still photographs that were taken from a security camera at the Citgo station that are very unclear. And these people said that the FBI came out and confiscated all the video from the security cameras. Now, you don't hear any stories like that in Phoenix. You don't hear you hear about it at the Kennedy assassination, that there are men in black, I guess you could call them, going around taking people's cameras and and confiscating whatever visual images there are. But here they did it, and what does that serve? Why would the FBI not release clear footage of the Pentagon plane crash unless they want the idea that there's no plane crash in the Pentagon to fester and develop and create an absurd argument that takes away from the real understanding of what actually happened there.
Indeed, but that's a real tough nut to crack. 9/11 itself and everything that happened on that particular day is a really hard nut to crack because there are so many different angles going on, and it's quite obvious that the government is manipulating things from behind the scenes. And based on their track record, if the government is manipulating something from behind the scenes, it's for an evil and nefarious purpose, because that's pretty much all they ever do in secret is evil and nefarious things. So whatever it is they're trying to accomplish is that's it.
Well, there's a level of bureaucracy that has a permanent interest. That's why that's why people are always so disappointed that when a new person gets in the White House, particularly if during the campaign at some point they said, like Clinton did, that they're going to get to the bottom of the UFO issue. Mm-hmm. And then they become president, and you never hear about it again. I don't think Obama made that promise. I think Obama said something like, he doesn't know about UFOs. He's more concerned with, what's going on this planet or whatever.
Yeah, I remember the quote you're talking about. Yeah.
The powers that be, the ones with the permanent interests that go beyond administration, they all understand that there's nobody going to be sitting in that White House more than 8 years. And so, why would you let them in on something this important? It's just, I think they kind of regard the White House as just a public relations office in the first place. Mm-hmm. If any president has ever been debriefed about UFOs, and they certainly didn't get the true debriefing. I think you can see clear indications that Eisenhower knew something, and his vice president Nixon probably did. In fact, what was I reading? Recently, somebody was making the point that apparently in the 70s, I think Peter Robbins was making this point in an essay I was reading. In the 70s, there was a story that Nixon, in the heat of the Watergate business, was going to release what he knew about the UFOs as kind of a last-ditch effort to draw attention away from Watergate. That was a current rumor in the 70s. It never happened.
That's very interesting. Yeah. There's a crazy story that's told about Richard Nixon supposedly liking to to sneak away from the Secret Service at night to go on walks or to take a trip in his car. And supposedly on one evening he picked someone up and took them to. He was in Florida at the time. He picked somebody up and took them to a place where they were holding an alien spacecraft and showed it to them. And this was all like done under the sly, and supposedly this fits in with the mythology of Nixon and.
Well, actually, it was Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason, that's who it was. Yeah, it was Jackie Gleason. That's right.
It was Jackie Gleason, and it was in Palm Springs, the exact place where Eisenhower disappeared for a few days, supposedly because he bit into some chicken and he chipped a tooth and supposedly went to a dentist. But according to the lore, this is when Eisenhower made some kind of contact with these aliens, or got his debriefing, or kind of made the arrangements with the aliens that they could abduct people in exchange for allowing us to back engineer their technology or all that stuff. It's the coincidence of place, the Palm Springs thing that gives that a bit of credibility.
Right, and of course, that wraps into another area that you're interested in, and that is Wilhelm Reich. And of course, there's a connection between Eisenhower and Wilhelm Reich that you have fleshed out a little bit in some of your research. And
yeah, that's exactly right. I actually also just turned down another contract to write a book on Reich too. I have this book in me called Wilhelm Reich: A Technology of Space. But I'm going to hold off and do it as a PDF. But Secret and Suppressed 2, the last book I did before this with Adam Parfrey, whose father, by the way, Woodrow, was also one of the apes in Planet of the Apes. But there's an essay. Yeah, there's an essay in Secret and Suppressed 2 about the connection between Eisenhower, and it goes over all the stuff about Eisenhower possibly meeting with aliens, and then all about Wilhelm Reich's last days fighting UFOs in the deserts in Tucson and submitting reports to Eisenhower. And within that argument is, to me, what is rock-solid proof of the existence of MJ-12. There are lots and lots of MJ-12 papers. There are the ones that Stanton Friedman and Jamie Shandera and those guys found in the National Archives in the early 80s. And Robert and Ryan Woods have surfaced a lot of questionable provenance. I think there's a guy named Timothy Cooper who supposedly has admitted to hoaxing a lot of those things, some of which actually mention Fred Krisman and Clay Shaw together. So whoever hoaxed those documents had a firm grounding in the history of it all. But hoaxed or not hoaxed, and they say a lot of the original MJ-12 documents look like hoaxes too. But there's one called the Cutler-Twining Memo, whose dates match up perfectly with another memo that Jim Martin surfaced in doing a book called Wilhelm Reich and the Cold War. He went to the archives of Lou Douglas, who was a member of Eisenhower's cabinet, and he surfaced this document that shows that the Air Force did meet with one of Reich's assistants, a guy named Moise. And the substance of the Cutler-Twining Memo that Stanton Friedman surfaced in 1980 is that we're postponing a special study subcommittee of MJ-12 to deal with this. And that date is exactly what you find in this other memo. And these are in separate archives, the discovery of which is separated by 20 years. The idea that this is just a coincidence, it's harder to accept that than it is to just acknowledge the fact that there was an MJ-12 group, and here's the proof. It doesn't prove that there were aliens or anything like that, but it does prove that there was a group called MJ-12.
Yes,
so you can find
indeed.
all that in that Secret Suppressed volume.
Yeah, and that's a good book. I have that one as well. It's a collection of various different articles, just like the first book was, Secret and Suppressed.
The first one was by Keith, by the way.
Yes, indeed.
It was great. It had a bald guy on the cover, and if you held it up to the light, he had a swastika on his forehead.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a book, and I do have that, and it's one of the ones that I've read many times. But we're about ready to wrap up here, so we'll just let me just say that my guest this evening was Kenn Thomas, and you can find him at steamshovelpress.com. He has a new PDF book that you can get on his website right now, Popular Parapolitics, and it's a 219-page book of commentary, which talks about, it includes first-hand accounts of Elvis Presley's funeral, the last of the great beat writer conferences, and never-before-published commentary by JFK Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden on famed researcher Sherman Skolnick. And Skolnick is a pretty interesting character. Maybe we'll talk about him one of these days, and all the things that he did in the course of his life and work.
Let me interject a rumor.
Oh, please.
Without trying to go too far outside the bounds of secrecy, but the Conspiracy magazine is about ready to start being published, and I hope to make a regular contribution to it. I haven't actually discussed. And the guy who's publishing it wants me to do something, But my idea for it is going to be called The Profiles in Counter-Conspiracy. And what I would like to do is 2 small articles, one on a currently active researcher and one on someone like Sherman Skolnick, a guy who spent his whole life fighting the parapolitical cause, who's passed away. Like one profile of Mae Brussel one month and Skolnick the next, all at the same time right next to like a John Judge or a Schuyler Alfragan or somebody who's doing current work.
Wow, that's great. You're going to have to keep me informed of that because, current material is always the best. And now with Paranoia no longer being published, which was one of the great mainstays for a long time, finding a print magazine would be super. I think that would be great. So keep me informed of what's going on with that because I'd definitely be interested in that. So we're about ready to wrap up. I want to give Jamie a couple minutes so he can get his guests ready for his show. But I'll remind everybody again to check out Steam Shovel Press. You can also find Kenn's books on Amazon.com. And as I said, he wrote a couple of books in collaboration with Jim Keith, who is also a great conspiracy researcher. Kenn I regard as probably the modern day I'd say like the grandfather of conspiratoriology today. I don't want to make it seem like he's ancient and decrepit or anything like that, but just that he has been in the field for a long time, and I respect his work because he takes the time to look into things in an in-depth fashion, and that's why we find the incredible connections that we do, and that's why we know now that there is a connection between JFK and UFOs through Fred Chrisman and the Maury Island affair, and all of the other characters that were operating up in the Pacific Northwest. So. This is one of the reasons why we need great researchers like Kenn, and I highly recommend his work to you. So definitely stop by his website, and if you haven't read any of his books, pick one up. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And dig a little bit deeper and find some of the answers to some of the questions that you want, or at least new questions to ask, which sometimes is just as important for people to engage in. So, Kenn, I want to thank you for being with us today, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat with you again in the future.
Ted, thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure, and I'm very honored by your comments.
Well, you deserve them. You've been in the field for a long time, and I think everybody who sticks with this for a long time deserves to be recognized, and people should be aware that a great deal of gratitude should go to those people who have been in the field the longest, and it doesn't matter what field it is, but you find that there are very few people who stand out in the crowd when it comes to particular fields of endeavor, and I think that you're one of them, so you deserve credit for that, and I think it's important. So,
okay, I'll come back on your show anytime then.
So steamshovelpress.com for Kenn Thomas, and Steam Shovel Press on Facebook. You can connect with him there as well. And definitely check out his books at Amazon.com also, and check Steam Shovel Press for PDFs, and maybe even print on demand will be coming out from there as well. So thank you again, Kenn, and you've been listening to the Stench of Truth radio show here on InceptionRadioNetwork.com every Friday from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So join me next week, and my guest will be Chica Bruce, Chica Alexandra Bruce next
I love
week.
Chica.
Yeah, so we'll have to listen next week for Chica Bruce, and so we'll catch you then.
When you saw your mother's diamonds, did you recollect the pain that she doesn't care that you were?